success, wealth, recognition. Gary Cooper had it all, lost it all, then turned a revolutionary discovery into the success paradox. Here's Gary.
My guest this week empowered an online community for women experiencing emotional abuse called Pathway to Hope. Patrick Doyle brings over 30 years of experience working with people from all walks of life in treatment centers, churches, and his professional office. Amber Lyn is a certified life coach and mom of two. She has firsthand experience with emotional and spiritual abuse. With authenticity and care, they guide women to rediscover their worth so they can build lives of purpose and joy. Patrick, welcome to the Success Paradox.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Amber Lyn, welcome as well.
Thank you.
How would you describe Pathway to Hope and the work that you do?
Well, it's women, and mainly women, who are coming from emotionally abusive situations, whether it be a relationship, it can be a family member, and they're looking for clarity, really, because in emotional abuse, it's very confusing. You lose touch of reality because you've been so brainwashed by the people harming you. A lot of them are coming to us because they're looking for clarity. At first, we thought we were developing a program to help them get freedom, which I think is true for sure. But really what people are coming to for with us is they're looking for clarity. Like, what is my situation? And then once they get the clarity, then they go to the place of acceptance. Oh, that's what I've been going through. And then we can go into towards the freedom outlet. But without really knowing what's going on or accepting your reality for what it is, it's a tough thing to navigate. And a lot of these women are coming from church too. So it's even more confusing.
The biggest problem is when you're in a relationship with someone who is using tactics, abuse tactics, to get you to doubt your own perception. And Gary, you talk about in your book about trusting your instincts. Well, the greatest victim of someone who is being gaslit or denied, rationalized, minimized just by spirituality, whatever the tactic is, the consequences, it makes you doubt your own perception of reality. And when that happens, then all the wheels start coming off. And I can't tell you how many brave souls, women that I've talked to, who the first thing they say is, I just feel crazy. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's real. I don't know what's right. And so unfortunately, in the church, there are some theologies that bolster that and keep women in a situation where they're trapped. And having been a pastor in my past, very aware of the theological undergirdings for some of that, I can help those ladies navigate that in a way that's unique. Because it's one thing to have, your spouse telling you you're bad, but when they say that God and them are telling you you're bad, that's a whole nother level of harm to try to overcome. So one of the things we do is we provide that safe place for women to explore and start to get some clarity about what actually is happening, and then support them as they make the very difficult choices to navigate through that and set boundaries or, make decisions that keep themselves safe, whatever that is. And it is not for the faint of heart. I am amazed at the courage I see on a daily basis from women who are very minimally supported. And that was the inspiration that Amber and I had, was to build a community that was safe, where the support and the information was present, but more importantly, the information, because it's everywhere. More importantly is the real, actual support.
Patrick, why I'm interested in this is I work in healthcare. I work predominantly with women. My career's mainly been with 90% women, and a lot of them have been single working moms. And home healthcare is a very flexible job, and it's been 90% women. You use the term gaslit. I don't think a lot of people understand how powerful gaslighting is.
So Amber, can you role play with me a little bit?
Sure.
So bring a concern to me, Amber.
So Pat, you left your phone on the kitchen table, and I looked at it, and there was a name on it. It was like Suzanne. I remember Suzanne was like your ex-girlfriend. Is she texting you again? I thought we talked about you guys not talking.
No, we're not talking. And why are you looking at my phone? What's your problem? I didn't do anything wrong. Your issue is that you're overly jealous. So in that, Gary, you see how quickly I took her concern and turned it into something that she's doing wrong and her problem, and she's misperceiving reality.
So gaslighting is being able to absolutely have confidence. The betrayer has so much confidence in what they're lying about or defending. They can say it with such confidence and conviction to make the person being betrayed feel like an idiot.
Yeah, like in that case, he would say like a different name, like, well, it wasn't that name that you saw this name. And then you got questioning your reality. Well, maybe I didn't see that name. Maybe it was somebody else. So kind of get second guessing yourself.
And you take that over 10,000 experiences, it's not one cut. I call it the death of 10,000 cuts. If somebody showed up at my office and he's had one cut, I'd be like, okay, well, that's we can work on that. But if somebody showed up and had 10,000, they're bleeding all over the place, you'd be like, oh my God, we have to do something. But with the subtlety and the manipulation that goes on in these relationships, it's very hard to put your finger on unless you understand it, which is why a lot of churches and a lot of therapists, I think, really do more harm because they really don't understand it. And then they try to help and they don't. They actually create more stress. One of the things you mentioned, Gary, and I know that I appreciate this about in your book, that you talk about this idea of, the way we see things or our perceptions, right? Like, how do we perceive success? Well, in these relationships, the power that person has to be so certain about what they're saying is their epic, I call it industrial strength denial. And when someone gets to the place of industrial strength denial, they believe their own lies. So now when that's the case, there's no hope of change, right? Because you can't talk to that person. And, I know in my own life, I've been in that position where I've had beliefs that I thought were so true, but they were harming me. And thank the maker that I was able to have clarity and move past that. And so the key that I see is, I believe, Gary, everyone has what I would call epiphanies or moments of clarity. Everyone, all throughout their lives. The difference is what someone does with that moment of clarity. In your case, Gary, you had a moment of clarity and you changed your life. But I've talked to thousands of people in treatment centers where they had the moment of clarity and they just kept going to their own demise and to their own death. So that denial breaking is the fulcrum of living healthily and in a healthy relationship or not. That's the key component, is how much denial does that person have?
I consider myself lucky, but I want to go back to the person Amber Lyn was pretending to be. Amber Lyn was confronting her husband. I said, hey man, I saw your old girlfriend's name. And he was like, that's none of your business. Why are you looking at my phone? And by the way, that wasn't her name. And she just, for lack of a better term, she just ate shit. Doesn't matter why she did it, but she did it. I'm kind of curious, Amber Lyn, you experienced that in your life. Why does one do that? Is it shame? Is it guilt? Is it to keep the kids? Is it not to get smacked? Is it all the above? And part B, how do you break that insanity?
I think you hit on a bunch of different specific examples, depending on the person. Yes, yes, and yes. Like, it could be all the above. It could be one of those. Like, I can speak for myself, little self-worth, not being taught early on. My mom was actually the emotionally abusive one growing up. And then I didn't grow up with a dad. So I was never taught to trust my instincts, and my opinions didn't really matter, or my feelings or my needs, or, all of those I wasn't allowed to have, and I was shamed for having it. So for one, to be that woman in that situation to even confront someone takes enormous amount of courage, because I wasn't allowed to do that growing up, and I was also really harmed for it and accused. So I have a lot of training that I had to break to even realize that what that person was doing is, like you said, I'm eating shit. Like, I didn't realize that. So yes, for me, I would say shame is huge in that, but also being taught not to trust my instincts. And then, so there I go, like, well, he's probably right, and I probably did it wrong, So that I was always blamed growing up in my relationship with my mom.
So does the betrayer, do they normally, Patrick, exert power of some kind.
Always. Threat, intimidation, financial control, spiritual control, relational control, like who they can hang out with, who they can talk to, all of that stuff. But one of the most maddening parts of it is when someone who's the abuser has a good reputation, is successful, or has an appearance of spiritual health, whatever. How is that woman going to say anything? Because on the outside, he's great. It's behind the closed door that all this happens, and no one knows. And she's been covering it up for years to try to make it work. So the layers of that intensity just stack. And that's why I believe every time a woman has the courage to face this and come out of it, it's a full-blown miracle.
So it's really, really a risk for her to come out and say, hey, that guy really is a jerk. And he's been holding the power of the kids. He's been holding the power of the money. He's really a jerk behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, who wants to face that? I mean, I call it the death of the dream. You're standing at the altar with this person and you're going to have a great life and you love each other and it's going to be wonderful. No one wants to face the fact that you actually married the devil that's destroying you.
So, Amber Lyn, what was your aha moment? I mean, when did you say, I'm tired of eating crap?
Well, we talk about vitamin V, like validation. Like one of the things that a lot of us grow up with in emotional abuse is you're constantly shamed and told that you're no good and worthless. And it's all in subtle ways. It can be through body language. It can be a look, it can be, words. It can be all of the above. And so when I started surrounding myself with people that like really saw me and saw who I really was, although it was really difficult for me to accept compliments to begin with, once I started really letting that in, that validation with these amazing people in my life, and I would say Patrick is one of them, that's when things started slowly changing. Like, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not all of these things that my mind constantly tells me that I am. That is always negative, right? Maybe I do have value. Maybe I do have worth, and it doesn't matter what I do or don't do. And that was really life-changing for me growing up in the church too, because it's very much like, if you do these things and you'll have these outcomes and everything will be just fine. And so if you don't do these things, then, you're not going to be in a good place. So to learn that like I have value and worth no matter what I do, no matter what decisions I have, well, at that point I have options. I never had options in my life or choices. So that started getting me wondering, what would it look like? How do I want my life to live? So once you start seeing your worth and believing it, and like Patrick says, even if you believe it at like 0.1% more, I mean, that's life-changing compared to where you're at. And gradually those percentages keep increasing to where you're making bigger risks for your life.
It reminds me, thank you, Amber Lyn. I was told when I was doing a 180, completely changing the direction that I was going in. And mine, I would say, really started with very much depression. I'd had back surgery and then 3 hip replacements. One of them got infected. It was terrible. And I was told when I started changing my life to begin acting as if. That reminded me, you were told for a long time you didn't have value. Patrick and others started saying, no, you are valuable. You are beautiful. You are strong. You are these positive attributes, when somebody else was exerting power telling you that you weren't. I had to start beginning to believe and acting as if. And so one silly example, one guy said, get up and get dressed for work like you're running a Fortune 500 company, even though you're not going to work. And that sounds silly, but it put me in that mood. Even though I wasn't even going into the office yet, I was acting as if.
Yeah, I like that, Gary, because what that is an internal act of valuing yourself appropriately. as opposed to all those messages that came with, you're not good enough. What about this? You should have this. You didn't that. You can't do this, blah, blah, blah. I call it the committee in your head. They get together and they talk crap about you.
The itty bitty city committee.
The itty bitty city committee, that's right. But they ain't so itty bitty most of the time. They might be a controlling force. So one of the quotes that I put on my social media is, you are the prize. Don't let anyone treat you otherwise, including yourself. And when we start valuing ourselves appropriately, here's the difficult part of that. When you start valuing yourself, you're going to come to difficult places in certain relationships that are devaluing. And so I just want to say this because I don't want anybody listening to this to get the wrong idea. Once that value starts to come up, it creates what I call a ping pong. You ping pong out of it and you're like, oh, this is great. And then an event happens, or you have a thought or a memory or something, and then you're like back in the shame and you're like, oh no, because, and then ping pong up and then you're out. And so when you're in ping pong, that makes me really happy and excited, because ping pong means denial is decreasing. But no one changes like that. Never happens. It's always a process. And the ping pong is a healthy and normal part. And I think it's a mercy that we don't change all at once, because we would be so unaware of who we are and what to do. And that process is very important to our internal strength, one little bit at a time. And so when Amber describes that, her starting to see her value, that also snowballed and turned into bigger and bigger and more important transformations. And I think that's the same as it did with me. As I started to see my value and it started to, the percentages of the lies, I lived in the lies 99% of the time. And as I went down, my whole life changed. And I don't think anybody ever gets to zero. I just don't believe in those kind of cataclysmic all either or ideals. I think it's percentages. So if I, like Amber said, if I'm at 98 and I move it to 97, my life is radically different and I can continue on the process. And so I see a lot of people get overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, it's so much. And I'm like, well, just one thing today, this one thing, it's all, you're not going to change everything today. So, and when you're under a lot of pressure, emotional pressure, and you feel unsafe, it's even more difficult. So that's why I think healthy support and having people around you to be present with you, not to really inform you necessarily, just to be present and support you. And like Amber said, provide the vitamin V, healthy validation, not fake validation. This is why I believe in an intimate relationship between two people that's intimate. When that person is valued by the intimate partner, that is the most healing force on the planet, because they know me and they see me and they're validating me. So all of those lies that say I'm inadequate, they can't carry any water because that person already knows. So the validation, I think, is key to also helping you stop being in denial about your value.
Well, the other thing about validation is not only just validating your worth and your value, but validating what you've been through and that you're not to blame. I mean, that was life-changing for me. When someone saw my situation, they're like, honey, like, you're not at fault here. Like, you got some crazy people in your life. Like, that blew my mind, because for the longest time, I thought I was the problem. So once I started being able to assign who the problem actually is, which isn't me, I have my struggles for sure. And I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means, but like the abuse that I endured wasn't my fault. And that is another form of validation. So healing.
We all keep talking about validation. I could not agree with y'all more, because I had the self-pity. And then if you had my problems, if you had this, if you had that, and look, misery, that statement is true. Misery loves company. So in my little world, I just attracted miserable people like me. And I don't know how that case works in Amber Lyn's case and in Patrick, your case. But you're talking about validation. What I was told is I had to change the people that were around me. Who are the validators, Amber Lyn? How did you get the right validators? Because if you had that narcissistic asshole around you, gonna validate you correctly, he's gonna grab you by the ankle and pull you back down, or she, or mom, or him.
Well, I think part of valuing myself and starting was to reach out for help with people that really understand what I'm going through. I mean, I think Patrick is a great great person in my life. I mean, we know each other through a bunch of different ways through the community and stuff. And I would just come across and just ask him a question every once in a while, like, is this normal when this and happens, And he'd be like, no, that's not. And I trusted his advice because he's listened to people's stories and has helped people for the last 30 years. So it's validating for me to hear that. Well, one thing people don't understand, and I hesitate to say this because it is a hard process to walk through, because in order to bring those people in, you have to let go of the unhealthy. And that is not easy. And I was alone a lot for a long time. So I would say that my circle of people, they say circle of people, you want your 5 or whatever. I would say I have a few polka dots, that are like really in my life that I really am grateful for. But what's great about that is because it's forced me to really spend some time with myself, which I was avoiding too for a long time because I didn't like who I was. And so home is with me, and then it's also with my polka dots around me here. These people that took some time to come into my life. Like I had to be alone for a while, and that was hard and painful. But as you know, Gary, it's necessary for that healing.
That's really where I wanted to go, is give folks a how-to. There's people that you have to cut out of your life, not just the betrayer, but also other folks that were unhealthy. I tell people all the time, I did not like to be alone by myself because I didn't like my own company.
Exactly.
The fulcrum to the whole process is trusting your instincts. But listen, when you've been in an abusive environment, you've been with somebody who's telling you otherwise, you doubt your instincts. So I tell people, look, in a day, you might get 10 opportunities to trust your instincts. So you're having a conversation with someone and they're talking and your gut's going, that is not right. There's something wrong here. And the problem with our instincts, Gary, is that it gives us information that we can't prove. We just know. So it's like jumping off a tall building when you don't trust yourself to trust yourself. And so this is what I say is like, practice trusting your instincts. Now I see with women all the time, I see them do it all the time, like supernaturally, like really easily with their children. In their relationships, they're all mucked up. They're concerned about these risks and that they got it wrong. And what are people going to say and all that stuff. So when you're in a conversation or when you're doing something you're normally, and something comes to the surface, I want you to document it, just jot it down, voice memo, write it, and you don't have to do anything about it, but just capture it, because one of the most profound ways to begin to value ourselves is to stop suppressing. To survive anything, you have to suppress. I'm a child. I'm in an abusive environment. My dad's a 2-war veteran alcoholic and dangerous. I didn't know this at the time, but I'm a sensitive, empathic soul. But I thought there was something wrong with me because it wasn't more like my dad, right? So when I started to trust my instincts, it was revolutionary. But again, this is a thing that saved me. That is not an easy process. So I'm just going to tell you, if you get 10 chances today and you take one, we're going to celebrate because that's movement in the right direction. If you almost take one, we're still going to celebrate because at least you're aware of it. But as you trust your instincts, that is what is going to change your life and lead you to some places that might be a little bit uncomfortable relationally.
Patrick, that's such great advice because the fight or flight is what I think you're talking about. Amber Lyn, I'll never know what it's like to go what you've been through. I never will. Or any of the women that you guys work with. I will never know that. But I do know what it's like to suppress fight or flight. I do know what it's like to have the health consequences of that. And I believe personally, a lot of the chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, all those different things. And then I really believe real diseases, not that those weren't real, but death diseases, cancer, come from suppressing those things. And if we don't listen to that little voice, and here's how I was told to find that little voice. You know when somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're like, son of a, and you want to explode. And then that voice comes over and is like, Amber Lyn, you better calm down, girl. That is that voice.
I think there's another layer to that too, Gary, particularly for people who have been traumatized and been harmed and they know it. So let's just take it, for example, like let's just put it on somebody cuts me and I got an open wound. And then you come along and you jab your finger in my open wound. Now, I don't care how spiritual you are. I don't care how much self-control you have. I don't care any about your qualities. If somebody pokes your open wound, you are going to react. You cannot not react. And if you have a shame frame, then you're going to be the problem. But actually, if somebody pokes your wound and you react, that's normal. How you react is normal, but having control over that. So here's what I see, Gary, is people walking around with all these wounds, all suppressed, but all these wounds. And so the wind blows too much the wrong way, and that injustice meter gets pegged because of all the open, unresolved wounds. Now they got all that tension and they're in fight or flight all the time. And listen, what Amber said earlier was so important. Those wounds are important because you are. But if we keep avoiding them, we keep denying, and I call it hopium. We take another shot of hopium to convince ourselves it's not real or it doesn't hurt or whatever, instead of sitting with it and starting the process of healing that wound. Now listen, if you poke my scar, I don't react. And I'm more empathetic because I understand what it feels like to be hurt, but I'm no longer controlled by the pain of it.
Patrick, that's brilliant. So if I go back to what you're talking about, these open wounds, so you're saying name them and claim them.
As much as you can. But listen, I don't remember a bunch of my childhood, and I hope I don't. Because I'm pretty sure it's no better than what I already remember. I think the idea that you have to remember everything is a dangerous idea. I don't think that's true. But what won't leave you alone? What finds you in the middle of the night? What finds you when you're hanging out with your kids, you're driving down the road? Jot it down, okay? But you got to find somebody who understands this. And so this is what Amber and I are endeavoring to do. I want to help people take those wounds and get them to a place of healing so that they can now live not only free of the reaction, but now they can springboard off their experience and do that with other people. And listen, we have been fed a line about how to heal that. There's never any healing through avoidance, ever.
Yeah, that line of just rub some sand in a boy. Don't cry.
Yeah.
Don't cry. Like that.
That brings new meaning to that saying. But you can't do this either, Gary, without some actual support. And this is the thing I get nervous about is people getting out in here and then they don't have the support, and that can actually double down on your shame.
Man, thank you so much for sharing that, Patrick. And there's a lot more I need to discuss with you too, but we have to stop here. Next time on Success Paradox with Patrick Doyle and Amber Lyn from Pathway to Hope, Amber shares a strong message for anyone struggling right now.
I hope that you start believing more in yourself because the world also needs you. Though you don't see your gifts and your talents, they're there. And once you start believing this about yourself, you're going to start learning more and more, and you're going to inspire others too.
To learn and practice the Success Paradox lifestyle, visit GaryCCooper.com. The Success Paradox is a production of Forbes Books.